Good afternoon, Pythonistas. This is a next iteration of a code base that we were looking at in the last video, sort of. You may recall that we were firing off an interval. At an interval, we were firing off a program that did what? Change the background color. Now this one, what I do is fire off a function named cycle. Now as I'm talking, I'm kind of keeping my eye on that pink cone that's bouncing around there. Oh, it just disappeared, my goodness, as I mentioned it. That pink cone has been there for quite some time. Let's pick another one and see when it goes away. Let's pick the garbage can, or let's pick the turtle. It's pretty obvious that there's only one turtle. Now if another turtle appears, and it might, you'll notice there's quite a few fish bone skeletons, quite a few kittens, quite a few meteors. Supposedly this is a random process, so I'm keeping my eye on the turtle. We'll see if I notice when it disappears. There could be a game here, which is when a certain specific sprite shows up and you click on it, you notice it, then you win the game. There might not be a losing, except if time runs out. You might put a time limit on it. But you know, games, you can just, oh, the turtle's gone. I see that now. So what's the logic of this program? What are we doing? What I discovered in running this program is that you can only have one function playing the role of the event interval function. Like at first I set up birth and death as two separate interval functions, and I said they should each fire at around 2 seconds apart. And so that didn't work. What I ended up doing is creating a single function called cycle, and it randomly picks whether it's going to fire a birth or a death event. It chooses between those two. So supposedly it would even out over time and not get more and more crowded if it's truly random. However, my experience in running this thing for this long is it's a little bit biased towards true, I would say. In other words, it's getting more and more crowded over time. This is an interesting development. However, let's just try my hypothesis from the start. Let's start running the code from the beginning, and I'll explain it a little more. So I hit the green arrow, that starts it over. Actually, remember the blue button will save a thumbnail of the project. So then if you're sharing the project, people can sort of see that thumbnail. It also just helps you when you're looking at your own projects. So that was appropriately one of the many sprites. Now where do I get these sprites, first of all? See, they're being born and dying pretty much at the same rate so far. So it's like births and deaths are kind of in sync. But what happens in the last population is I had a spate of births, and then we never quite caught up again with deaths. This long list called all sprites that I'm showing on the left, that's actually purged from, there have been sprites purged from that. Where I got it is a pretty remote part of Codesters. Under logic, under lists, there's some canned lists that you might find useful. And one of them, towards the bottom, default list is called recyclable sprites. Is that the one I'm looking for? Or there's the one below that called all sprites. I'm in Firefox and I can't quite get to the uber bottom of the interface. Maybe if I hit the minus, make this whole thing smaller. That ought to solve it. I still don't quite get the very last list here. Can't even click on it. So that's an argument for using Chrome instead of Firefox, I'm pretty sure. Recyclable sprites, I don't think, that's interesting that they have that as a category. That's interesting. Anyway, I do have an all sprites list that I started by getting it from Codesters itself, and then I purged it of sprites that actually turned out not to exist. Now what's interesting here is my population has never really built up very much here, whereas the other one when you joined me, here we're up to 3 sprites, 4 sprites, but the population is pretty low. So if there is a bias on the side of birth, it's here we're up to 4 sprites. It was so crowded before, and I hadn't done anything to really make that happen, but it just was like that. Now in the background I do have what you could call a log going, where sometimes, actually it hasn't said this for a while, oh it has actually, it'll get down to where there's no people and yet you're still trying to delete from the sprites. By people I mean sprites at this point. Like that's a turtle people. So if I try to fire a death event when there's actually no population, then it prints a certain log message. If it manages to go through with a birth or a death, it prints other things, right? So anyway, have fun with this as a concept. I'm sure you can think of other things to do with interval. And remember, if it works with just 2 different events, birth and death, you can have it do other things as well. In other words, you can do what's called dispatch, where you're firing cycle every 2 seconds, correct? But at that point, once you enter cycle, you get to dispatch it or randomly have it be dispatched, which is what I'm doing. But you can weight that too. You can make births more likely than deaths. In fact, let's do that as a closing experiment. Let's make births quite a bit more likely, and all we have to do is put a couple more trues in here so that we're really weighted now towards true over false, which in this scheme means birth over death. And now if we run the thing, I expect it's going to populate rather quickly by comparison to before. Still, it's starting out with only a few. It's not quickly multiplying its population, but let's just see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and make my screen bigger before. We got the old recycling can in the operations. Okay, so we're already up to like 5 sprites, which is more than we got in the last demonstration in almost 3 minutes, I'd say. And here we're only in the first opening minute or 2, and we're already looking at quite a bit of a population. So the idea of an interval is like a time frame, and the idea of a change is a delta of some kind. So you can do a whole storyboard here, a scenario where your events can get quite complicated, and you can study certain models. You can basically get into simulations of certain types. I leave it to your imagination, and of course once you've gotten the concepts, you're not confined to Codesters at all. You can take these concepts and transfer them elsewhere. All right, good talking with you. We'll talk to you again soon.